FromSoftware is back at it again with what could be one of the best titles for your Steam Deck in 2023. Let's talk about it. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Joystick Ayrton. Today we're talking about the Armored Core 6, the first title in the series since 2013, and another stellar one by FromSoftware. Now, it did not sell like Elden Ring or like some of the Dark Souls games of the past, but for an Armored Core title, it did fairly well over opening weekend. Steam had a peak player count of 150,000 at time of writing this, and then you still had the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X as well, so they did fairly well. Now, with that being said, it is not deck verified, which is actually pretty surprising considering all but Dark Souls Remastered are deck verified. That one is playable, but performs just as well as any of the others. And this is playable as well, but not deck verified. Now we're going to talk about how it performed on the ROG Ally. A little inside to that, it didn't perform at all. We're going to also talk about the GPD Win4 performance as well. And we have a super cool title and piece coming up on this in the next couple of weeks, probably post Labor Days. Hopefully everybody's going to be having a really good Labor Day, and I won't be here for about 6 days. But with that being said, let's go ahead. We're going to dive into the performance on each one of these models, what you should be expecting, whether you should even give the game a try, and just really where it stands in games that have launched for the deck this year. So let's get started. Okay, in this part of the video, we're going to talk about where Armored Core 6 ranks in games for the year on the Steam Deck. Now, I'm actually going to put this above Baldurs Gate 3, and that might be a hot take, but it's not because I like the game better than Baldurs Gate 3, although I might prefer it just a little bit, but Baldurs Gate 3 is amazing, but I do not like how it looks on the Steam Deck. It looks washed out. The screen is just not good enough for that style of game. I can get away with it when I'm on a mech exploding things, but when I'm really looking at all the visual cues, I want the much nicer screen on the Ally. Even the Win4 screen is nicer, or I'm just going to play on my PC. Now, with some of you, that might not be the case. Maybe the deck is your only console or game platform, but for me, it's going to be above that. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. The ROG Ally. I absolutely loved this thing most of the time, but Armored Core 6 would not stay on. As soon as I launched into Mission 1, crash over and over and over again, and I started a new campaign just to make sure that it wasn't anything to do with the save file. But as soon as it went to launch into the game, just instantaneous crash. Now for me, what I'm going to be assuming is the cause of this, and I had it with Baldurs Gate, had a couple other titles, is the Z1 Extreme platform is just not that matured yet. There's drivers that are just slowly starting to come out, and I'm assuming that's what's plaguing this. You might not be having that same issue. That doesn't mean that I'm not, or that X, Y, or Z, or Billy or Bobby might be having the same issue, but they might not. That was just my experience with the ROG Ally. Now, I actually preferred the game on my Win4 just because it looked better on the screen, but for some people that might be crazy considering how small this thing is compared to the Steam Deck. But it did run very well on the Steam Deck, but I would prefer it here on the Win4. Now what we're going to do for this part of the video, we're going to talk about the benchmarks on the 6800U and my Win4. We're going to talk about it on the Steam Deck. We'll compare those. I'm going to give a little bit of a guess on where the ROG Ally would be with the Z1 Extreme if I got it to run, so we'll talk those numbers. But those numbers will not be actual numbers. This is just going to be assumption for the data points on the ROG Ally with actual gameplay numbers from the Win4 and the Steam Deck. So let's go ahead and jump into that part of the video. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the benchmarks. We only have 2 slides here, and I want you to keep in mind that we're running 720p across the board here for everything. When I'm testing up against the Steam Deck, I don't really care about 1080p, especially on a 6-inch screen like the GPD Win4, but I also really don't care about it on a 7-inch screen like the ROG Ally either. Another thing that I want you to keep in mind with these benchmarks is the fact that the ROG Ally benchmarks are assumed benchmarks. Looking at other data that I looked at, I'll link those resources in the comment section and the description as well. But also just keep in mind that this is an assumption for all of the benchmarks that I show on the next slide for it. But here at 720p across the board, we tested 10 watt, 15 watt, 25 watt, and 30 watts on the GPD Win4. And then at the bottom here, we had the Steam Deck at its native 15 watts. So the GPD Win4 at 10 watts did fairly well at 33 frames per second, but jumping up to 15, it really stretched its legs to 59 frames per second. Going up 10 more watts to 25 didn't do very much for it, only gaining about 4 frames per second. And another 5 watts took it to 65, so only a couple frames per second there. Now, from 59 to 65, you could say that's worthwhile if you're sitting there docked, but you're going to get much longer battery life out of this 45 watt hour battery. Now, when going to the Steam Deck, we averaged to 39. This was across that entire mission that we showed in the video before, but this was very good at 15 watts, but compared to the 6800U, it really just stretches its legs, and just it is a superior chipset. Now we're going to go ahead and move over to the ROG Ally. Now the ROG Ally, these are numbers that I got offline, as well as checking some other sites and kind of assuming about what I know the Z1 Extreme processor is over the 6800U. So at about 15 watts, I would expect to have about 65 frames per second here, sometimes fluctuating up towards 70, and that's really where it's going to stretch its legs out, just kind of like the GPD Win4 and other titles like Baldurs Gate and other FromSoftware games. We kind of stagnate and have diminishing returns, where at 25 watts, I would assume we're still in the upper 60s, low 70s, and the same thing with the turbo mode. So really 15 watts, kind of just your native Steam Deck power package on the 6800U and on the Z1 Extreme, really allows this game to stretch its legs. Above that, you have diminishing returns, shorter battery life, not really gaining much besides running the hardware, having a hotter device, and much poorer battery life. So let's go ahead, jump out of this, and wrap this whole video up. So the game performs absolutely perfect on both the 6800U and the Steam Deck, and where I would assume you might land with the ROG Ally is awesome as well. Now, the ROG Ally maturity, other issues that could pop up, you're not very sure either way, but it should be a really good experience as it is on the Steam Deck, where you're between 30 and 38 frames per second, give or take, depending on what's happening on the screen. Now, my GPD Win4 is more powerful. I was in the 40s most of the time there with it, but it is just phenomenal on all of these handhelds. It is fantastic on my gaming PC. It is just all around another banger from FromSoftware. These guys put out extremely good content, and you should play every game that they have. Any of them work perfectly well on the deck. Now, I would assume this is marked as playable instead of verified because of some text in some places is very hard to read. That's what makes the 6-inch screen on the Win4 extremely difficult in some titles, which is why, like Baldurs Gate 3, with being able to enlarge the text is awesome, and I prefer it on here over my deck just because of the screen just looks better, really, which is where I found myself in most games recently, at least, higher quality graphics games. But with that being said, Armored Core 6 is awesome. You definitely should pick it up. I'm about 3 chapters in now. Haven't finished it off yet, but I will soon. And FromSoftware just doesn't disappoint. They put out extremely good titles. They work well on all platforms. They definitely put an effort into their titles working on the deck and being verified and putting out patches to fix those issues when they do arise. And not only that, they're not microtransaction laden battle pass DLC games that come out like Diablo and then implode themselves. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think of this video in the comment section down below. The channel, what hardware are you using? Are you going to pick up Armored Core 6, or is it just not the game for you? Let me know in the comment section down below, and we will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.